I think first and foremost, the conference has so many parallel sessions and panels that it's hard for me to even say what it is about, because I think there's so many things that it covers, which is a good thing. I think that people are interested in education can find pretty much any track that they'd be curious about. And that was an impressive feat to pull all of that off and to create all the logistics. Yeah, I think I have. So first and foremost, every time I do a conference in a different country, it helps me understand the context within that country much better. We work with universities all over the world, and thinking through how to implement our system within different cultural contexts, within different regulatory contexts, is very, very helpful. And so the people that EdCrunch has brought together really helped give me some insight into how the Russian higher education system works and what are some of the areas in which we can be helpful here. So Minerva is a new educational system that we built to enable a vastly more advanced higher education than currently exists. And we deployed that system initially in an undergraduate program that we created ourselves. And today, the Minerva schools at KGI are the most selective, most effective university in the history of the United States. And so Minerva then now serves as a model, as a university that other universities around the world look up to and think about as a tool on how to reform what they do. And so what we exist to do is to not only provide that inspiration, but also to help universities in reforming what they teach. So it's actually, what's funny about Minerva really is that there's no magic involved. For the last 30 years or so, there's been an enormous amount of research on how the brain actually works, but that research has not been used systematically to change institutional design. Some professors may change the way that they conduct their classes. Some programs may be inspired by elements of it, but no one has really said, okay, given what we know about how humans learn, how can we create an educational program that is optimized for that from a top to bottom basis? And that's what Minerva does. And so we bring that system that takes all of this peer-reviewed published research and then applies it, and we enable other universities to use it by incorporating that system. So I think it comes in two elements. The first one I like to call perception is not reality. What occurs is many times when you ask students, did you learn a lot in a class? And they'll say, oh yes, I learned a ton because it was a great lecture. It turns out that not only do students not retain that information, but they retain information in environments where they think they aren't learning. Another example is that if you look at teacher rating, right? So when students rate their professors and say, oh my God, this was a great professor and all the rest, it turns out that those ratings are slightly inversely correlated with educational outcomes. And so the better a group of students think a professor is, for a small amount, the worse the outcomes are. But the fact that it's not even neutral or not even positively correlated is shocking, right? And so much about the science of learning is not to do what's popular, but to do what's effective. So that's category number one. Category number two is how important programmatic change is versus unit change. If you were to take a course and make it adhere to the science of learning, you would have a good impact in that course. But the problem is, a course is only 4 months or so. And learning occurs over a long period of time in multiple contexts. And so what you actually need is reinforcement of what happens in one class by a different professor in a different class. And so the programmatic approach is really the big step change in what Minerva does versus really anybody else. So far we use natural intelligence, not artificial intelligence, and in fact, artificial intelligence is often limited by natural stupidity in the people who are programming it. And so, AI has a lot of promise, but that promise is a few years to go before it's realized in the world of at least the synchronous education world that we play in. Yes, absolutely. So we've already been created implementations of our system in Latin America, of course in the United States, in Hong Kong, in China, in India, in Korea. We're about to launch an implementation in Japan, and we're working on a number of European implementations as well coming forward, and we very much hope to have one in Russia as well. Well, I'm an opera lover, and I love being in a great opera city. And so I always enjoy learning more and more about opera. I'm also a history buff, and so I always like to find various periods of history I don't know much about and kind of dig into them. And it's all very much at random. When I started Minerva, I got to learn a lot more about ancient Rome because much of the principles of the kinds of thinking that we're based on is classically inspired by the Roman Republic. And so that's been an interesting area of interest of mine, but also I like much more contemporary history. I like modern politics and things like that. So I keep myself busy. Yeah, what's interesting is that the conferences do tend to be areas of knowledge dissemination, and knowledge dissemination isn't particularly effective in the sense of you sit down in a lecture and then you hear everything and then you move on. But what occurs is that if you hear a talk that is inspiring to you, and then you take action, you go up, you meet the speaker, you exchange information, you create a path to follow up. That's where implementations occur, right? And so the first university we ever implemented occurred in just that way. I met somebody at a conference. He was excited by what I was talking about. He came up to me, exchanged cards, invited me to come to the university and give a set of lectures in a different time. They flew me out and arranged a whole symposium around what we were doing. And a year and a half after that, we launched a partnership with them at their institution. And so these are the ways in which gatherings like this can have real impact. My mother was a biology teacher for 19 years. And she's now in her 80s. And invariably, every year, when she walks down the streets of the city she lives in, even though it wasn't where she taught high school, it was a different city, about once a year, someone stops her in the street and tells her, "Oh my God, Hannah, you were my biology teacher 40 years ago, and you changed my life." And the ability for a teacher to do that means that they only focus on one incentive, and that's to transform the lives of their student. The teachers that are focused on everything else doesn't matter. That's not going to be the thing that fulfills why it is that they became teachers in the first place. When you focus on the development of the students that are in your care, all of a sudden you have a great sense of clarity on what are the things that are tools that can help you in that process versus what are the things that are superficial, and that focusing on meeting those superficial targets won't educate the students and probably won't meet those targets to begin with. So one book which I recommend that is actually just now coming out but I got a preview copy of, and I just read, is Diane Taverner's book called Prepared. And Diane Taverner started a group of charter schools in the United States called Summit Schools in California that have had remarkable results. Again, focused on the learner, focused on outcomes, not all of the other nonsense. And Dan makes an extraordinarily compelling argument about not only what and how students should be taught, but really the why. And I highly recommend it. It's a great book.